Imagine a student who ranks 66th overall in their graduating class. Like, they're solidly middle of the pack when you look at their combined GPA.
Right.
But somehow, year after year, this exact same student wins the national championship in the single most difficult, most competitive subject available.
Yeah, statistically, that makes absolutely no sense.
Exactly. I mean, if you're 66th in the aggregate, you aren't supposed to be claiming the #1 spot in a highly complex subcategory.
Yeah.
You expect a correlation there. You expect the valedictorian to be winning the individual awards.
Well, yeah, it defies how we typically understand composite scoring. Like, we expect economic powerhouses to lead in social metrics and, developing or transitional economies to lag behind across the board. We really like our data categories to be clean and predictable.
But then you step into the world of global demographic data, and that clean categorization just completely falls apart.
It really does.
Because we have a towering stack of data today spanning from 1990 all the way to 2023, detailing the human development progress of Belarus. And the mission for this deep dive is to explore that exact statistical paradox. Like, how does a country that currently ranks 66th globally on a Human Development Index manage to repeatedly crown itself #1 in the world on the Gender Development Index?
It is a profound diagnostic mystery, honestly. And to solve it, we really have to look past the standard headlines of gross domestic product or gross national income.
Right, the usual money metrics.
Exactly. A nation's economic output is just one slice of the pie. The real, lived story of a population is told through its health, its education, and how equally those resources are actually distributed.
So we are going to decode the mechanics of what we're calling the Belarus model over a 30-year timeline. We want to see how, amidst the massive global uncertainty of the last 3 decades, this nation built a really resilient fortress of social equity.
Yeah.
And just to set the ground rules for you listening, we are looking strictly at the raw demographic machinery here.
Just the data.
Right. We're diving into the official reports, the trend lines, the statistical evidence to understand how these social policies actually translate into, human lifespans and classroom hours. This is an impartial, data-driven exploration of the math and the sociology, completely without endorsing any specific political viewpoints. We're just here to follow the numbers.
And those numbers provide an incredibly objective lens. I mean, they show us the friction between policy and reality. So if we want to understand the paradox, we first need to establish the baseline.
That makes sense.
We really need to look at where Belarus stands in the 2023 data before we can even begin to understand how they got there.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at the 2023 snapshot. The foundational metric is the Human Development Index, the HDI. In 2023, their score is 0.824.
Which is a crucial threshold.
Yeah.
Yeah, because HDI measures 3 basic dimensions, right? A long and healthy life, access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living. Crossing that 0.80 mark officially places a country in the very high human development category globally.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it basically means the baseline infrastructure for human thriving is functionally in place.
But the current score only tells us where they are parked today, right? The real story is the trajectory. Because if you trace the trend line back to 1995, the HDI was sitting at 0.692.
And that 1995 context is just essential. I mean, a score of 0.692 reflects a country in the immediate aftermath of the Soviet Union's collapse.
Right, massive instability.
Exactly. You're looking at a society dealing with hyperinflation, the sudden fracturing of continental supply chains, and just massive structural shifts in employment. For many transitional economies in the 1990s, human development metrics were in a complete freefall.
Yet from that 0.692 in the mid-90s, the line just steadily climbs. Like by 2010, they hit 0.803, officially entering that very high tier, and they've secured it up to 0.824 in 2023.
It's a very steady upward slope.
And I look at that timeline, and I see the dot-com bubble bursting, the 2008 global financial crisis, the massive disruptions of the 2020 pandemic. We're talking about structural turbulence that wiped out decades of progress in other developing regions. It's like an airplane flying through massive turbulence, but the altitude gauge just keeps climbing. What is powering the engine there?
Well, it really comes down to what a society chooses to use as its shock absorbers.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
In a lot of economies, during a financial crisis, the first things to face austerity cuts are social programs, education, public health, maternal care.
Right, they tighten the belt on social spending.
Exactly. But the engine powering the resilience in the Belarusian data isn't purely driven by, commodity booms or rapid financial sector expansion. It's driven by a systemic prioritization of universal social infrastructure.
So they don't cut the baseline.
Right. When you refuse to cut the educational and health baseline, your society doesn't experience those catastrophic developmental freefalls during global crises. Your economic output might take a hit, sure, but your human development floor remains completely solid?
Which brings us directly to the 1 versus 66 paradox we started with. Because if the overall societal floor is solid enough to rank them 66th globally, where exactly are they overperforming to such an extreme degree?
They're overperforming in the eradication of gender-based developmental gaps. That's the key. We need to look really closely at the Gender Development Index, or GDI.
Yeah, the historical data here is just staggering. I mean, in 1996 and 1997, out of 113 ranked countries, Belarus was literally ranked #1 in the world for GDI, with values of 1.038 and 1.030.
Which is huge.
And looking at the 2023 data, the GDI value is 1.009, placing them in Group 1, which signifies absolute gender parity. But break down the math of that index for me. What does a score over 1.0 actually measure?
Okay, so the GDI is calculated as the ratio of female HDI to male HDI.
Okay.
It measures the gender gap in those fundamental achievements we talked about: health, knowledge, and living standards. So a GDI of exactly 1.0 means perfect mathematical parity between men and women.
So when a country hits 1.009, it isn't just saying women have caught up.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is it indicates that in the foundational dimensions of human development, women have actually surpassed men.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the aggregate developmental outcomes, like the combination of schooling, lifespan, and baseline living standards for a woman born in Belarus today, are marginally higher than for a man. To see a ratio consistently above 1.0 across a 30-year timeframe is exceedingly rare in global demographic tracking.
That's wild. And we see this reflected in the Gender Inequality Index, too, the GII, which, as I understand it, looks at the actual loss in potential development due to gender disparity.
Right, it factors in things like reproductive health, empowerment, and the labor market.
So for the GII, a lower number is better. And in 2001, their score was 0.255. But by 2023, that number plummeted to 0.080, which ranks them 27th in the world.
A plunge from 0.255 to 0.080 over 2 decades is a monumental shift. I mean, you don't achieve a 0.080 by just passing a few equal opportunity laws.
You can't just legislate it overnight.
Exactly. It requires dismantling deeply entrenched structural barriers to female participation. It means you are aggressively dropping adolescent birth rates, you're virtually eliminating maternal mortality, and you are ensuring women are moving into the workforce at very high rates.
But a system like that doesn't just materialize out of thin air. To get a GDI creeping over 1.0, you have to build a foundation that practically guarantees that level of female participation.
You do. You have to start with the bedrock of any modern society, the ultimate equalizer, really, the education system.
Right, let's look at the 2023 education statistics, because the parity here is dialed in completely. For expected years of schooling, females expect to receive 15.2 years of education, while males expect 14.2 years. So women are actually anticipating a full extra year of formal education.
Which is a significant margin.
And then when we look at mean years of schooling, the actual average years of education completed by adults aged 25 and older, both women and men are sitting at exactly 12.3 years.
And that parity in mean years of schooling is the result of decades of compounding policy. But the truly revealing metric isn't just the average years spent in a classroom.
What is it then?
It's the absolute coverage of the population.
Right. This is the data point that absolutely jumped out at me. If you go back to 1995, 77.5% of women over the age of 25 had at least some secondary education. For men, it was 89.1%.
Right, so there was a visible gender gap.
Yeah, and there was still a roughly, 10 to 20% chunk of the overall population trying to navigate a post-Soviet economy without a baseline secondary education.
Which is a huge disadvantage.
Totally. But fast forward to 2023. The percentage of women with secondary education is 99.3%. For men, it is 99.9%.
Statistically speaking, they have effectively eradicated the educational gender gap by eradicating the concept of an uneducated adult entirely.
That's an amazing way to frame it.
Yeah, I mean, they've moved completely beyond striving for just access to a state of absolute universal secondary education.
It's like upgrading a societal operating system.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like education here isn't just a ladder that you hope to climb if you have the right resources or live in the right district. It is the floor that everyone stands on. They upgraded the societal operating system so that nobody is left running on an outdated version.
Right. Every single citizen has the basic code required to function, adapt, and participate in a modern economy.
Exactly.
And when you establish that near 100% secondary coverage, you fundamentally change the nature of your workforce. You create a massive universal talent base.
And that impacts everything else, right?
Absolutely. A fully educated female population has fewer adolescent pregnancies, better household health outcomes, and a much higher capacity for civic and economic engagement. It creates this compounding interest effect on human development.
So the education system is functioning like a well-oiled machine, catching virtually everyone. But building that massive talent base brings up a harsher reality in the data. Like, how long do these highly educated citizens actually get to live to use that education?
Yeah, this is where the picture gets complicated.
Because when we pivot to the health metrics, we hit a massive wall of friction.
It is the most glaring anomaly in the entire data set, without a doubt, and it completely complicates the narrative of uniform progress.
I'm looking at the life expectancy at birth for 2023. The data shows women living to an average of 79.1 years, but men are living to only 69.5 years.
A nearly 10-year gap in life expectancy.
Wait, I need to push back on the mechanics of this, because if we just establish that 99.9% of men and 99.3% of women have secondary education, and they're living in the exact same country, accessing the same universal healthcare infrastructure, how on earth are men dying a full decade earlier?
It's a very valid question.
I mean, think of it like running two identical engines on the exact same fuel. If one engine burns out 10 years faster, it has to be subjected to massive environmental friction. So what is the friction killing men in this demographic model? Is this a public health failure or a cultural phenomenon?
The friction there is really a complex web of sociological, occupational, and behavioral factors. This decade-long gap is a critical public health challenge for the Belarus model, and honestly, it's a known, deeply entrenched phenomenon in several post-Soviet states.
Okay, so it's not isolated.
No, not at all. And it's rarely a failure of the acute medical system, meaning if a man has a heart attack, the hospital can usually treat him just fine. The issue is why he's having the heart attack a decade earlier than he should be.
So it's more preventative and environmental.
Exactly. It points to severe occupational hazards in male-dominated heavy industries, higher rates of cardiovascular disease, and significantly higher behavioral risks.
Like what?
Well, historical patterns of alcohol consumption and smoking that disproportionately affect the male population. So while the female population is experiencing life expectancies that approach Western European standards, male life expectancy is heavily depressed by lifestyle and occupational realities. Yeah, it highlights a desperate need for highly targeted gender-specific public health interventions that focus on the psychology and daily reality of the male workforce.
And we also see how fragile a lifespan can be when a sudden external crisis hits, right? The data tracks the impact of the 2020 and 2021 global pandemic, and it stress-tested this demographic vulnerability heavily.
Very heavily. The pandemic exposed the underlying health fragility. In 2021, female life expectancy dropped to 77.1 years, and male life expectancy plummeted to 67.2 years.
That's a huge drop.
It represents an immense strain on the healthcare infrastructure and a tragic loss of human capital.
But then the data for 2023 shows a rapid rebound back to 79.1 for women and 69.5 for men. So they took a massive hit, but the healthcare system didn't permanently fracture. It absorbed the shock and recovered its baseline.
Which demonstrates the systemic elasticity we talked about earlier. And if we want to see the absolute pinnacle of that healthcare system's capability, where it operates with almost zero friction, we have to look at the maternal health data.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The maternal mortality ratio, the MMR. This measures the number of maternal deaths per 100,000 live births.
Right.
Back in 1990, the number was 38.1. That means roughly 38 mothers were dying for every 100,000 babies born. But by 2023, that number had fallen to 1.1.
1.1 deaths per 100,000 live births. That is a 97% reduction.
Logistically, how do you even achieve a number that low? Because you don't get a 97% reduction by just building a few nicer hospitals in the capital city.
No, absolutely not. A number like 1.1 is the definition of a ceiling level metric.
Meaning they've basically maxed it out.
Exactly. It means a country has essentially pushed maternal safety as high as scientifically and logistical possible. To achieve that, you have to completely eliminate maternal deserts.
Oh, areas without care.
Right. It requires a comprehensive, inescapable network of prenatal screening. It means that from the moment a woman in a remote rural village realizes she's pregnant, She is plugged into the exact same monitoring system as a woman living in the center of Minsk.
It's an entire supply chain of preventative care.
It really is a triumph of medical logistics. You need expert obstetrics available locally and rapid emergency intervention protocols like dedicated transport or airlift capabilities if a rural birth suddenly becomes complicated. To hit 1.1, the system simply cannot have any blind spots.
And if we tie this back to the 1 versus 66 paradox we started with, this is exactly why the GDI sits at 1.009. Because when women are guaranteed world-class safety during childbirth, when they're outliving men by a full decade, and when they're educated at a 99.3% rate, you have a female population that is biologically, intellectually, and temporally empowered to participate in society at an incredibly high level.
They possess an immense amount of human capital, so the next logical step is to see how the economy actually absorbs all that capability.
Which brings us to the labor market, the dual-engine economy. Looking at the labor force participation rate for 2023, 65.25% of women over the age of 15 are actively in the labor force, compared to 74.85% of men.
And a female participation rate over 65% is remarkably robust.
Really? Compared to the global average?
Yes, compared to many countries with similar income levels where female talent is often sidelined after childbirth, Belarus successfully keeps women integrated into the active workforce. This high mobilization of both men and women is the real engine of their economic vitality.
But here is where the data reveals a massive contradiction. We just saw highly educated, long-living women participating in the workforce at huge rates. Yet, when I look at the gross national income per capita measured in 2021 purchasing power parity dollars, men earn an average of $31,904. Women earn an average of $22,205.
And there is the structural barrier.
Wait, hold on. You just walked me through data proving women are living 10 years longer, expecting a full extra year of schooling, matching men in actual years of schooling, and participating in the labor force at massive rates.
Right.
The math isn't mathing. How is there still a 43.7% gap in income? What is the invisible barrier here? Where is that 40% disappearing to?
Well, this raises an important question. That 43.7% gap is the primary headwind holding back absolute total gender equality in the Belarusian model. When education and health are equalized to that degree, an income discrepancy of that magnitude almost invariably points to two deeply entrenched psychological and economic realities:
Sure.
occupational segregation and the glass ceiling.
Okay, break down the mechanics of occupational segregation in this context. What does that actually look like?
It means that while both men and women are working, they are segregated into entirely different economic ecosystems. Women are disproportionately concentrated in vital foundational sectors that are traditionally undervalued by the global economic system.
So, like teaching and nursing.
Exactly. We're talking about the care economy, the education system, nursing, and basic administration. Men, conversely, are clustered in industrial, technical, or resource extraction role sectors that historically command much higher wages.
So the entire society relies on women to act as the highly educated foundation-like. They are the teachers ensuring the 99% education rate, the healthcare workers driving the maternal mortality down to 1.1, but the economic system refuses to value that output at the same rate as the male-dominated industrial output.
That is exactly the friction. The social infrastructure that makes the very high HDI possible is largely built on undercompensated female labor.
Wow.
Yeah. And the second factor, the glass ceiling, means that even when women do enter higher-paying corporate or bureaucratic sectors, their advancement into the highest executive wealth-accumulating roles is stalled. The capability and the education are there, obviously, but the financial reward mechanisms are still deeply skewed toward male-dominated pathways.
With an income gap that wide, it kind of raises a question about the overall reality of the country's development. I mean, if some demographics or classes are making significantly more money than others, an average score like an HDI of 0.824 can be incredibly deceptive.
It certainly can.
Like, if a billionaire walks into a coffee shop, the average wealth of everyone in that room skyrockets, but the barista doesn't actually get any richer. We need to know if this development is hoarded by a few or actually distributed to the many.
And to measure that, we look at the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, the IHDI. This metric is designed specifically to expose exactly the kind of hoarding you're talking about.
Right. So the HDI gives us the average potential, but the IHDI discounts that score based on the actual inequality and its distribution across the population.
Correct.
In 2023, the baseline HDI was 0.824, but the IHDI sits at 0.771. That represents an overall loss of human development due to inequality of only 6.4%.
And to put a 6.4% loss into global context, it is exceptionally low.
Really? What's typical?
Oh, in many fast-growing or developed nations, you routinely see inequality losses of 15, 20, or even 25%.
Think of regular HDI as the total horsepower generated by a car's engine. It tells you the maximum potential. But the IHDI is how smoothly that power is actually delivered to the four wheels on the pavement.
I love that.
Yeah, if you have a 20% loss, your car is shaking, the alignment is completely wrecked, and some wheels are getting zero power while others are spinning out of control. A 6.4% loss means the power is actually reaching the pavement evenly. Almost everyone in the car is getting a smooth ride.
That structural smoothness is really the defining characteristic of the Belarus model. If we drill down into the specific dimensions of the IHDI, the loss in the education dimension is only 2.8%. The loss in the health dimension is roughly 3.5%.
That's incredibly tight.
It is. It proves mathematically that the state infrastructure, the schools, and the hospitals are truly universal. You don't have a fractured system where the wealthy elite experience a 0.900 HDI reality, while the rural poor are trapped in a 0.500 HDI reality. The human development dividends are reaching the vast majority of citizens.
But generating all that universal power requires fuel. You can build a highly equitable engine, but you have to look at the exhaust it's pumping out. Which brings us to the planetary pressures adjusted HDI, PHDI. Basically, are they destroying their natural environment to achieve this high standard of living?
Right. Can you achieve very high human development without breaking the ecological boundaries of the planet? It's the defining challenge for every industrialized nation right now.
Looking at their carbon dioxide emissions per capita, the historical trend is actually surprisingly positive. In 1990, the emissions were sitting at 10.39 tons per capita. But by 2023, that number had dropped by nearly half, down to 5.95 tons.
What the data shows there is a partial decoupling. Over 30 years, their Human Development Index went up steadily, while their carbon dioxide emissions per capita were cut nearly in half.
So they're doing more with less pollution.
Exactly. They are proving that developmental progress doesn't require a lockstep increase in environmental destruction.
But 5.95 tons per capita is still a pretty substantial footprint.
It absolutely is. The decoupling is happening, but the reliance on legacy energy systems and fossil fuels remains a significant stress point. The PHDI adjusts their overall score downwards based on these planetary pressures, acting as a stark mathematical reminder.
A reminder that they still have work to do.
Yes, that while their social equity model is highly evolved, their ecological model still has a massive transition to make if it wants to be sustainable for the next half-century.
To ensure that any of these social policies actually survive, like to keep the education coverage near 100%, to maintain the logistics for maternal health, and to navigate this environmental transition, we have to look at who is actually making the decisions,
Right.
who holds the steering wheel.
The final piece of the puzzle is political representation. It's the mechanism that ensures the social contract isn't just a temporary initiative, but a permanent feature of the state.
So I pulled the data on female representation in parliament. Back in 2001, women held 18.4% of the parliamentary seats. Fast forward to 2023, and that number has nearly doubled, climbing to 34.7%.
And that growth is critical because political participation is not just a vanity metric. It's the fundamental feedback loop of a society.
All right, so
Well, in political science, there is a well-documented concept known as critical mass, which usually occurs when a demographic reaches roughly the 30% threshold in a legislative body.
how does hitting 30% change the mechanics of a parliament?
Below 30%, a minority group often functions as a token voice. They can raise issues, but they struggle to drive the agenda. Once you cross that 30% threshold, you actually start shifting the culture and the legislative output of the institution.
Oh, wow, so they have real leverage.
Exactly. Belarus crossed that 30% mark around 2004 and has maintained it. When over a third of your parliament is female, it fundamentally guarantees that the policies protecting maternal health, the funding for universal education, and the legal framework supporting women in the labor force are fiercely defended and continuously expanded. The guardians of the system are the very people who benefit most directly from its equity.
We have covered an immense amount of statistical ground today, dissecting 30 years of demographic machinery. Let's summarize the findings into a clear visual for the listener. Think of the Belarus model as a solid triangle built on 3 distinct points.
I like that. The first point of the triangle is education as the vanguard. Achieving near 100% secondary coverage, 99.3% for women and 99.9% for men, creates a massive universal talent base. It is the non-negotiable floor that makes every other developmental achievement possible.
The second point is equity is the engine. That remarkably low 6.4% inequality loss on the IHDI. It proves the development isn't being hoarded by an elite class. It is actively distributed to the masses. The power of the state's engine is actually reaching the pavement evenly.
And the third point comprises the future challenges. The model is highly resilient, but it faces severe friction points over the next 30 years. They have to confront the sociological crisis of men dying 10 years earlier than women. They have to navigate the transition away from fossil fuels to lower their planetary pressures. And crucially, they have to address the massive 43.7% gender income gap.
Which leaves us with a provocative thought to mull over. If we connect this to the bigger picture, human development is not just about stacking up gross national income. It's about ensuring every individual has an equal right to a long life and an educated mind.
Exactly right.
So what does this all mean for you? We've spent an hour unpacking what happens when a society successfully provides world-class education and world-class maternal health to its women, elevating their human development beyond the male population, yet still maintains a 43% pay gap.
It's a striking contradiction.
It is. As this highly educated, long-living female population looks toward the next 30 years, what happens when potential constantly collides with that payload? Will this structural friction force an evolution of the economic system compelling society to finally value care work, education, and female labor equally? Or will that persistent friction eventually cause an inevitable brain drain as all that meticulously cultivated talent seeks fair compensation in other economies?
It's the defining question for their future.
Look at your own community. Look at your own workplace. Where's the friction between human potential and economic reward happening right now? Keep questioning the numbers behind the narratives you see every day. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.